Welcome, weary traveler. Tonight, we embark on a journey not of grand battles or sweeping political dramas, but of something far more intimate, far more fundamental, the very taste of history itself. Close your eyes, or simply let your gaze soften. Allow your mind to drift away from the clamor of the modern world, the sharp, exciting, overwhelming flavors that assault our senses today. We are going back in time, not to the clang of swords, nor the roar of a castle feast in full swing, but to the quiet, subtle, earthy hum of a medieval kitchen, a peasant's hearth, a lord's simple dining hall. We're going to explore, in meticulous, calming detail, what medieval food truly tasted like. Forget your preconceptions of blandness or overwhelming spice. The truth is far more nuanced, far more intriguing, and perhaps, surprisingly, far more restful. This isn't a lecture to keep you awake. This is a gentle stroll through the culinary landscapes of the Middle Ages, designed to lull your thoughts, to quiet your mind, and to invite you into a deeper, slower appreciation of flavor and sustenance. We will delve into the grains, the vegetables, the meats, the drinks, the preservation methods, and the subtle, often unwritten rules that governed every bite. So let your breathing deepen. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest. The air grows cooler now, perhaps carrying the faint scent of wood smoke or freshly turned earth. We are stepping back to a time when food was not just nourishment, but a direct, unmediated connection to the land, the seasons, and the very rhythms of life. What did it taste like? What did it feel like in the mouth? What did it mean? Our journey into the medieval palate must begin with the absolute bedrock of the diet, grains. For the vast majority of people, from the lowest peasant, the mightiest lord, cereals were the omnipresent, unyielding foundation of almost every meal. Imagine for a moment a world where the supermarket aisle with countless bread types simply does not exist. Here, bread is life, quite literally. The dominant grains would vary by region and climate, but you would encounter wheat, rye, barley, oats, and millet. Each had its own properties, its own subtle flavor profile, its own textural contribution to the medieval table. Let's consider wheat. This was the preferred grain, the mark of status. If you were a wealthy lord, a powerful abbot, or a flourishing merchant, your bread would be made from finely sifted wheat flour. Imagine the texture, lighter, softer, perhaps with a subtle sweetness. It would still be denser than most modern white breads, lacking the rapid yeast leavening we're accustomed to. The crust would be thick, chewy, perhaps slightly charred from the wood-fired oven. The crumb, a pale ivory, would be relatively soft, offering a gentle resistance to the bite. It might taste faintly of the yeast from the sourdough starter, a piece of dough saved from the previous batch, providing a mild tang, a subtle earthy fermentation that would be entirely unfamiliar to a modern palate used to instant yeast. This was the white bread of the era, a privilege, a symbol. But for most, the taste of wheat bread was a distant dream. The pervasive taste of medieval life was the robust, often challenging flavor of rye or maslin. Maslin was a common mix of wheat and rye, offering a compromise between the desired lightness of wheat and the hardiness of rye. Rye bread, especially for the peasantry, was the daily bread. Picture it, a very dark, incredibly dense loaf. It was often so hard, so compacted, that it would be difficult to cut, let alone chew, unless freshly baked. The taste of rye is distinct, earthy, sometimes slightly sour, almost a little bitter. It had a deep, resonant, grounding flavor. The texture would be coarse, even grainy, a testament to the less refined milling processes. This bread was designed for sustenance, for filling the belly with slow-release energy for a day of hard labor. It wasn't a culinary delight. It was survival. Sometimes this bread, especially the rye, would be served as a trencher. Imagine a thick slab of this dense, slightly stale bread, perhaps a day or two old, serving as your plate. Food would be piled directly onto it: stews, meat scraps, vegetables. As you ate your meal, the trencher would absorb the juices, the fats, the flavors of the main dish. By the end of the meal, this trencher, now softened and infused, would then be eaten itself. Nothing was wasted. So the bread tasted not just of grain, but of the very meal it contained. A layered taste, a slow revelation of flavors. Then there were oats and barley. These were less commonly used for bread, especially in the South, but were vital for pottage and gruel. Imagine a thick, warm, somewhat bland porridge, often boiled with water or weak ale, sometimes with a few herbs or root vegetables if available. The taste would be mild, subtly nutty, a blank canvas for whatever meager additions might be found. It was a comforting, warming, but utterly unexciting dish, a staple of the poor, the sick, and often the morning meal for everyone. The texture, soft, almost gelatinous, easily digestible, providing gentle warmth to the stomach on a cold morning. Millet, too, was used, especially in warmer regions, offering a slightly sweeter, milder flavor, often used in porridges or as a minor addition to bread. The process of making bread, this daily ritual, also imparted a taste. The querns, hand mills used by peasants, produced a coarser flour, often with fragments of the millstone itself, adding a gritty texture. This was not always intentional, but it was a reality. Baking was done in communal ovens or in a hearth, meaning subtle smoky notes might permeate the crust. The taste of wood smoke, of open flame, was an inherent part of medieval bread. It was a taste of raw labor, of the earth, and of the fundamental struggle for sustenance. Close your eyes. Imagine biting into that dense, dark rye bread. Feel its weight in your hand, its rough texture. Chew slowly. Notice the subtle sour tang from the sourdough, the faint bitterness of the rye, the grounding, almost muddy flavor of the earth from which it came. This wasn't a complex taste, but an honest one, a taste of fundamental survival. Let that taste settle, a quiet foundational note on our palate of the past. Beyond the omnipresent grains, the medieval diet was profoundly shaped by the earth's seasonal offerings, vegetables. Forget the year-round availability of fresh produce we enjoy today. Medieval life was dictated by the turning of the seasons, and so too was the flavor of its vegetables. The most common vegetables were root crops and robust greens: cabbages, onions, leeks, garlic, parsnips, turnips, carrots, and broad beans. Potatoes, tomatoes, and corn were, of course, unknown, being New World crops. Imagine the taste of cabbage. This was a staple, grown everywhere. It would be boiled, often for long periods, perhaps in a pot with a piece of smoked meat or some broth. The taste would be earthy, slightly sulfuric when overcooked, but with a robust, almost peppery greenness when freshly picked. It was often preserved by fermentation, creating a taste akin to sauerkraut, a sharp, sour, tangy flavor that cut through the richness of meats and aided digestion. So you might encounter boiled cabbage, soft and yielding, or fermented cabbage, crisp and vibrantly sour. Two very different tastes from the same humble plant. Onions and leeks were culinary workhorses, providing foundational flavor to almost every savory dish. Their taste was pungent, sharp when raw, but mellowing to a sweet, caramelized richness when cooked slowly in fat or broth. Imagine the gentle aroma of onions slowly softening in a little rendered animal fat, filling the air with a promise of warmth and flavor. Garlic, too, was used, especially among the lower classes, for its strong flavor and perceived medicinal properties. A sharp, pungent bite, a lingering heat on the tongue. Parsnips and turnips were common root vegetables. Their taste was earthy, starchy, with a subtle sweetness that emerged when roasted or boiled. Imagine the subtle, almost bland, but comforting taste of a boiled turnip, a gentle, unpretentious flavor, perhaps with a hint of bitterness. Carrots, as mentioned, were often purple or yellow. Their flavor would be less sweet, more earthy and fibrous than modern orange carrots, a more rustic, less sugary taste. Broad beans were a crucial source of protein, often dried and then rehydrated for stews and pottages. Their taste was hearty, starchy, with a distinct, slightly earthy bitterness. A very satisfying, filling taste, providing a solid counterpoint to the blandness of grain. Wild greens and foraged plants also played a significant role, adding bursts of flavor and crucial vitamins. Imagine the slightly bitter, peppery taste of nettles, or the sharper, more pungent flavor of dandelions. These wild additions would bring a vibrant, sometimes challenging, freshness to a diet otherwise dominated by preserved or dried foods. Preservation was key. Many vegetables, especially cabbages and root vegetables, would be stored in root cellars or buried in sand to last through the winter. Their flavor would change, becoming less vibrant, more subdued, and sometimes developing a slightly musty or earthy note from storage. Others were dried, losing their crispness, but retaining a concentrated flavor that would bloom again when rehydrated in a stew. Consider the typical peasant's meal: a thick pottage simmering gently over the fire for hours. Into this pot would go whatever vegetables were available: onions, a piece of cabbage, some dried beans, along with oats or barley. The taste would be complex in its simplicity: the sweet mellow of cooked onions, the slight tang of cabbage, the earthiness of beans, all melded into a single, warming, nourishing whole. It was a taste of slow cooking, of patience, of making the most of every ingredient. A taste of humble resilience. Let your mind drift to the gentle bubbling of a stew pot over an open fire. Inhale the imagined scent of simmering vegetables, a comforting, savory aroma. What new subtle tastes can you imagine from these ancient, honest ingredients? Now, let's turn our attention to meat. While not an everyday staple for the vast majority, meat was a crucial component of the medieval diet, especially for the nobility and during feast days. Its taste, preparation, and availability were deeply intertwined with social status, hunting rights, and the ever-present challenge of preservation. For the wealthy, a diverse array of meats might grace the table: beef, mutton, pork, venison, boar, rabbit, hare, and a wide variety of fowl. For the poorer classes, if meat was eaten at all, it would likely be poultry like chicken or goose, or perhaps a tough piece of salted pork, or the occasional rabbit. Imagine the taste of freshly roasted venison. Unlike farm-raised beef or pork, venison from wild deer would have a much stronger, gamier flavor, leaner and more intensely red. It would be roasted over an open fire, slowly turning, the fat dripping and sizzling, creating a smoky, slightly charred crust. The interior would be tender, but with a resilient chew. It might be seasoned with some salt, a few common herbs like sage or thyme, and perhaps a touch of pepper if it was affordable. The taste: rich, earthy, robust, a primal flavor connecting you directly to the hunt, to the wild forests. Pork was ubiquitous, prized for its fat and ease of raising. Imagine the taste of salted pork. For much of the year, pork would be preserved through salting or smoking. This imparted a very strong, intensely savory, almost salty-sweet flavor. It would be boiled or stewed to make it more palatable, releasing some of the salt. The texture would be dense, perhaps a little rubbery from the preservation process. This was a taste of foresight, of enduring winter, of carefully managed resources. Beef and mutton were also common, often from older, tougher animals. These meats would be slow cooked in stews and pies to tenderize them. Imagine a rich, savory beef stew, the meat falling apart, infused with the flavors of onions, carrots, and strong herbs. The taste would be deep, comforting, and hearty. Fowl, especially chickens, geese, and ducks, provided a more consistent source of meat, even for those of moderate means. Imagine a roasted chicken, its skin crisp from the fire, the meat succulent. The flavor would be pure, unadulterated chicken, perhaps richer and more distinctly flavored than modern poultry, due to the bird's freer range and natural diet. Fish was also a critical protein source, especially on fast days. Fresh fish would have a delicate, clean taste, but most people would consume salted or dried fish, particularly herring or cod. Imagine the intensely salty, dry, almost brittle texture of dried cod rehydrated for a meal. Its flavor was concentrated, powerfully briny, requiring significant soaking and preparation to make it palatable. This was a taste of the sea, preserved through necessity. The cooking methods themselves influenced the taste. Open fire cooking was dominant, imparting a smoky flavor to almost everything. Meats were roasted on spits, stewed in cauldrons, or baked into pies in earthen ovens. There was little precise temperature control, meaning variations in doneness and charring were common. The taste of wood smoke was a pervasive, comforting undertone to many dishes. Spices, imported from the East, were used, but not quite as indiscriminately as some myths suggest. They were incredibly expensive, a mark of wealth. If you were a lord, you might enjoy a dish seasoned with precious black pepper, ginger, cloves, or cinnamon. These spices would be used boldly, not subtly, to showcase the owner's wealth and to mask any off flavors from less than fresh ingredients. Imagine the sharp bite of pepper, the warming sweetness of ginger, exotic and powerful. For the common person, the spices were limited to locally grown herbs: parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, savory, marjoram. Their taste would be fresher, greener, more herbaceous. Consider a simple medieval roasted chicken. Imagine the smell of it, slowly turning over the fire, fat sizzling. The aroma of smoky meat fills the great hall. When it's served, the skin is crisp, lightly charred. The meat inside is succulent, juicy. You tear off a piece. The taste is pure chicken, perhaps with a subtle herbal note and the ever-present whisper of wood smoke. This was a taste of direct, honest cooking, of robust flavors, and of a world where every meal was a hard-won victory against hunger. Let that rich, smoky taste linger in your mind, a testament to the primal art of cooking. As essential as food, if not more so, was drink. In a world where clean, potable water was a rarity and often a source of disease, what people drank was a matter of survival, custom, and pleasure. Forget tap water. Imagine a world where every sip carried a history, a taste of its origins and its purpose. The undisputed king of medieval beverages was ale. This wasn't the strong, complex craft beer we appreciate today. This was small beer, a very weak, low-alcohol brew, typically with an ABV of 0.5% to 2%. It was brewed constantly, in every household and monastery, and consumed by everyone, from infants to the elderly, from dawn till dusk. Why ale? Because the brewing process involved boiling the water, which killed harmful bacteria and made it safe to drink. This was infinitely safer than well or river water, which was often contaminated by human and animal waste. Imagine the taste of small beer, thin, watery, often slightly sour or acidic from fermentation. It was rarely carbonated like modern beers, though a hint of fizz might occur naturally. The flavor would be predominantly malty, from the barley, perhaps with a subtle earthy or slightly bitter note from whatever local hops or bittering herbs were used. It was designed to hydrate, to provide a modicum of calories, and to avoid sickness. It was not a drink for sophisticated palates. It was a drink for life itself. You would drink it with every meal, and throughout the day while working. It was the taste of everyday medieval hydration. For the more affluent, particularly in wine-growing regions like France and parts of Germany, wine was the drink of choice. Imagine the taste of medieval wine. It would be very different from modern wines. Sweetness was highly prized, often achieved by adding honey or spices, or from grapes that were allowed to become very ripe. Winemaking techniques were far less controlled. You'd encounter a vast range of quality, from rough, acidic local wines to sweeter, more robust imports. Spices like cinnamon, ginger, and cloves were frequently added, creating mulled wines or hippocras, especially for feasts. These were not just drinks. They were a display of wealth and a source of exotic flavor. Imagine the rich, often strong, and sometimes slightly rough taste of medieval wine, warmed and infused with exotic spices, a complex and potent brew. Cider, made from apples, was common in apple-growing regions like Normandy and parts of England. Its taste would vary from dry and tart to sweet and fruity, often with a natural cloudiness. It was a refreshing alternative to ale, lighter on the palate. Mead, made from fermented honey and water, was a very ancient drink, particularly popular in Northern Europe. Imagine the rich, sweet, intensely floral taste of mead, its flavor directly reflecting the type of honey used. It could be quite potent, a warming, slightly viscous drink, often reserved for special occasions due to the value of honey. Water, in its raw, unboiled state, was generally avoided unless it came from a known, pure spring or well. If it was drunk, it would have the taste of its source, stony, earthy, or sometimes faintly metallic. For many, this pure water was a rare and precious thing, appreciated only when nothing else was available. Herbal infusions, teas in a very rudimentary sense, were also consumed, often for medicinal purposes. Imagine the bitter, earthy taste of a brew made from dried herbs like chamomile or mint, perhaps sweetened with a touch of honey if you were fortunate. So the taste of medieval drinks was varied, but always practical. Small beer, thin and sustaining. Wine, often strong and spiced. Cider, tart and refreshing. Mead, rich and sweet. Each a reflection of local resources, social status, and the prevailing need for safe, fortifying liquids. Let the thought of these ancient beverages settle in your mind, a gentle, warming presence, as you drift further into the quiet of the past. In a world before refrigeration, the preservation of food was not merely a convenience. It was an absolute necessity, a matter of life and death, particularly for surviving the lean winter months. And every method of preservation profoundly altered the taste and texture of the food. Let's consider salting. This was perhaps the most common and effective method for meat and fish. Imagine the process. Fresh meat, like pork or beef, or fish like herring or cod, being rubbed meticulously with vast quantities of coarse salt. The salt drew out the moisture, inhibiting bacterial growth. The taste? Intensely, overwhelmingly salty. Before consumption, salted meat or fish had to be soaked, often for days, with multiple changes of water, to leach out some of the salt. Even then, the final product would retain a distinct saltiness, a savory, almost briny flavor that permeated every fiber. The texture would be dense, firm, and often a little dry. This was the taste of long-term survival, of careful planning, of a flavor profile built around the preservation method itself. Smoking was another vital technique, often used in conjunction with salting, particularly for meats like ham and bacon. Imagine the rich, woody aroma of a smokehouse. The meat would hang for days, sometimes weeks, exposed to the cool smoke from slow-burning wood. This process not only preserved the meat, but also imparted a deep, complex, smoky flavor that became an intrinsic part of its character. The taste of smoked ham or sausage would be savory, with a subtle sweetness from the smoke, and a texture that was firm yet yielding. It was a taste that spoke of autumn harvests, of prepared winters, of the careful management of resources. Drying was crucial for grains, fruits, and some vegetables. Grains were dried to prevent spoilage and insect infestation. Fruits like apples, plums, and grapes were dried into prunes and raisins. Imagine biting into a dried apple slice. chewy, intensely sweet, with a concentrated apple flavor. Dried mushrooms, herbs, and some vegetables would be rehydrated later, their flavors deepened and intensified by the drying process. The texture would be firmer, more fibrous. Fermentation was an ancient and widely used method, particularly for dairy and vegetables. Think of cheese. Imagine its taste, from fresh, mild curds to firm, tangy hard cheeses that could last for months or even years. The flavors would range from creamy and milky to sharp, pungent, and earthy, developing as they aged. Then there's pickling, a form of fermentation used for vegetables like cabbage or cucumbers. The taste would be distinctly sour, tangy, and refreshing, a vibrant contrast to the often rich or bland flavors of other foods. Honey was the primary sweetener and a key preservative. Imagine its taste, not just sweet, but floral, earthy, spicy, depending on the blossoms the bees had visited. Honey was used to preserve fruits, to make mead, and to sweeten many dishes, lending a complex, natural sweetness that was far more varied than modern refined sugar. Fat, particularly rendered animal fat, was also a form of preservation. Meat cooked in fat and then sealed in it could last for some time, the fat providing a protective layer from air and bacteria. The taste of such meat would be rich, fatty, and deeply savory, saturated with the flavors of the fat itself. These preservation methods meant that the taste of fresh was a rare luxury, confined mostly to the harvest seasons. For much of the year, people consumed food whose flavor had been fundamentally altered by salt, smoke, drying, or fermentation. It was a taste of transformation, of adaptation, of human ingenuity in the face of nature's cycles. It was a taste that carried the weight of time and the wisdom of survival. Let these flavors settle, a salty, smoky, tangy, sweet symphony of endurance. When we think of medieval food, our minds often jump to lavish feasts. But these were rare, exceptional events, a world away from the daily reality of sustenance. Understanding the taste of medieval food requires appreciating the vast chasm between the everyday and the extraordinary. For the vast majority, as we've explored, daily meals were about basic sustenance: pottage, dark bread, maybe some cheese or dried beans. The taste was functional, repetitive, and often bland. Breakfast would be small beer and dipped bread. Lunch and dinner would be variations of pottage, thick and warming, or stews. Flavor variations came from seasonal vegetables, foraged greens, and the subtle, earthy notes of the grains. Imagine the quiet, almost meditative act of eating a bowl of thick, warm pottage by a hearth. The flavors simple and honest. A little onion, the bland sweetness of oats, perhaps a hint of a carrot. It was a taste of quiet nourishment, of life continuing day after day. Even for the lord and his household, daily meals were more robust than a peasant's, but still not the grand affair of a feast. They would have access to more meat, white bread, better quality ale or wine, and a wider variety of fresh produce in season. Their food would be more seasoned, with salt and perhaps the occasional pinch of pepper or ginger. Imagine the taste of a roasted capon, perhaps with a simple sauce of verjuice and herbs. The flavors would be clean, direct, and savory, a distinct step up from the common fare, but still a far cry from the elaborate creations of a royal banquet. Now, let your imagination stretch to the magnificent, chaotic, overwhelming experience of a medieval feast. These were not just meals. They were carefully orchestrated displays of power, wealth, and status. The taste was a sensory overload, designed to impress, to dazzle, and occasionally to confuse. First, the sheer quantity. Platters piled high with roasted meats. Whole boars, swans, peacocks, venison pasties, endless roasted fowl. The taste would be rich, fatty, savory. The cooking methods might be rough, over-roasted, undercooked, or a mix of both due to imprecise temperatures. But the impact was visual and olfactory. Then, the exotic spices. At a feast, money was no object. Black pepper, long pepper, grains of paradise, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger, saffron. These would be used boldly, sometimes in astonishing combinations. Imagine a meat dish seasoned so heavily with ginger and cinnamon that the meat's original flavor is almost masked, replaced by a pungent, warming, aromatic sweetness. Or a dish colored vibrant yellow with expensive saffron, its subtle metallic floral taste cutting through richer flavors. These spices weren't just for flavor. They were a status symbol, a declaration of global reach and immense wealth. The presentation was key. Food was often dyed in bright colors using vegetable dyes, green from parsley, yellow from saffron, red from alkanet. Savory dishes might be sweet, and sweet dishes savory. Meats might be ground and reformed into elaborate subtleties, edible sculptures of castles, animals, or mythical creatures. The taste here was often secondary to the visual spectacle, the surprise, the sheer opulence. Sauces were often thick, heavily spiced, and sometimes quite sweet, made from dried fruits, vinegar, and spices, providing a contrast to the richness of the meat. Imagine a sauce with prunes and cinnamon, coating a rich venison, offering a sweet and sour counterpoint. The wine would flow freely, often stronger and more potent than daily ale, perhaps heavily spiced and warmed. The air would be thick with the aroma of roasted meat, exotic spices, the chatter of voices, and the music of minstrels. The taste of a feast was complex, overwhelming, and designed to impress. It was a taste of social hierarchy, of global trade, of meticulous planning, and of pure, unadulterated extravagance. It was a temporary escape from the daily grind, a moment of sensory excess. Let the imagined smells and tastes of these grand celebrations gently envelop you, a rich tapestry of medieval culinary aspiration. Let's now consider the more subtle, pervasive sensory experience of medieval food embedded in the daily rhythms of life. It wasn't just about the taste of individual dishes, but the broader environment, the sequence of meals, and the constant awareness of food's preciousness. Imagine first the smell of medieval life, which was deeply tied to food. The ever-present aroma of wood smoke, wafting from hearths and communal ovens, clinging to clothes and hair. The sweet, earthy smell of baking bread, a comforting and fundamental aroma. The pungent tang of fermenting ale or cider. The savory richness of meat slowly roasting or stewing. The sharp, slightly sulfuric smell of boiled cabbage. The musky scent of root vegetables stored in damp cellars. These were the background notes, the olfactory landscape of daily existence. The texture of medieval food was often quite different. Less refined flour meant a coarser, more fibrous bread. Slow-cooked meats and vegetables would be very soft, almost mushy. Preserved foods, like salted fish or dried fruits, would have a much firmer, denser, or chewier texture. There was less emphasis on delicate textures or crispness, more on hearty, filling substance. Imagine the satisfying chew of dense bread, the comforting softness of pottage, the resilient texture of salted meat. Consider the rhythm of eating. Meals were typically 2 or 3 a day. Breakfast would be early, often before dawn, a quick, functional intake. The main meal of the day would be around midday, and a lighter supper in the evening. There was no casual snacking as we know it. Every meal was a deliberate act of refueling, a necessary pause in a day of labor. The act of eating was slower, more mindful, simply because the food itself often required more effort to consume. Seasonality dictated the freshest flavors. In summer, you might enjoy the delicate sweetness of fresh berries, the crispness of new peas, or the vibrant green of young herbs. These were fleeting pleasures, intensely savored. The taste of fresh, sun-ripened fruit, sweet and juicy, would be a rare and cherished delight. In autumn, the taste would turn to root vegetables, heavier grains, and the rich promise of preserved meats. Winter meant a reliance on dried, salted, or stored foods, their flavors deeper, more concentrated, and often more robust. The lack of sugar, as we know, it significantly altered the palate. Sweetness came from honey, dried fruits, or naturally sweet root vegetables. This meant desserts, when they existed, were often less saccharine, more complex, and often combined with savory elements. Imagine a dish of stewed apples, sweetened with honey, and perhaps a touch of cinnamon, a gentle, natural sweetness that wouldn't overwhelm the senses. The absence of many modern staples also shaped the taste. No potatoes, no tomatoes, no chocolate, no coffee, no tea. This meant a reliance on a narrower, though still varied, range of ingredients, leading to different flavor combinations and textural experiences. Imagine the taste of a medieval garden. Not just the vegetables, but the herbs. Strong, earthy, pungent herbs that were both seasoning and medicine. The taste of freshly picked parsley, its clean green notes. The woody, aromatic scent of rosemary, infusing a roasted meat. The warming, slightly bitter flavor of thyme. These herbs were the everyday palate of flavor for most people, far more accessible than exotic spices. The communal aspect of medieval food was also significant. Most people ate together, whether in the great hall of a castle, the refectory of a monastery, or the single room of a peasant's cottage. The sounds of chewing, slurping, and muffled conversation would accompany the meal. Food was a shared experience, a social bond. As you drift, consider these subtle, pervasive flavors and textures. The consistent hum of wood smoke, the gentle chew of dense bread, the sweet earthiness of roots, the comforting warmth of pottage, the tang of fermented ale. These are the tastes that shaped daily life, quiet, unassuming, yet utterly fundamental to existence in the Middle Ages. Our journey into medieval food would be incomplete without acknowledging the ever-present shadow of hardship and scarcity. Famine, disease, and the unpredictable nature of harvests profoundly influenced what people ate, and thus what it tasted like. Imagine the taste of hunger, a constant, gnawing presence for many, especially the poor, between harvests or during times of drought or war. This is a taste that no food can truly banish, only temporarily alleviate. The desperation would lead people to eat anything available. Bark, roots, weeds, anything that could provide a semblance of sustenance. The taste of survival at any cost. Famines were recurrent scourges, periods when crops failed and food supplies dwindled to nothing. During such times, the quality of food plummeted. Grain might be stretched with sawdust or ground with wild seeds that were normally considered inedible. Imagine bread that tasted faintly of wood, gritty and unpalatable, yet eaten out of sheer necessity. Meat would become a luxury for only the very wealthy, or acquired through desperate, illicit hunting. The taste of desperation and scarcity was a bitter, pervasive flavor. Disease also shaped food. Contaminated water meant constant risk, making ale and wine vital. Food poisoning was a real danger, especially from improperly stored or cooked meat. The taste of sickness, of a body revolting against bad food, was a common, unpleasant reality. Even in good times, the medieval diet could lead to nutritional deficiencies. The lack of fresh fruit and vegetables in winter led to scurvy and other vitamin deficiencies. While not a taste, the feeling of a body weakened by lack of proper nutrients was a constant background sensation for many. Consider the monastic diet. Monks and nuns often followed strict dietary rules, abstaining from meat for long periods or perpetually. Their diet would be heavy on fish, pulses, vegetables, and grains. The taste would be more ascetic, simpler, emphasizing purity and humility. Imagine a meal of plain boiled lentils with a piece of dried fish, the flavors muted, nourishing, but without indulgence. The reliance on local resources meant that regional variations in taste were profound. A knight or merchant traveling from, say, Normandy to Italy would experience vast differences in diet. A taste of olive oil in the south rather than animal fat. The use of more herbs and less salt in some areas. The prevalence of seafood on the coasts. These were subtle yet significant shifts in the overall palate. Even the taste of water was variable. Rivers and wells would impart their local mineral content, giving water a unique regional flavor profile, some fresh and sweet, others stony or slightly metallic. This was the most fundamental taste, often veiled by ale or wine. This constant push and pull between abundance and scarcity, between the seasonal bounty and the harsh realities of winter, shaped the taste of medieval food into something profoundly resilient. It was a taste of making do, of appreciating every morsel, of the knowledge that hunger was always just around the corner. Let this understanding of hardship gently remind you of the preciousness of sustenance as you ease further into rest. We've explored the foundations, grains, vegetables, and everyday meats. Now, let's turn our attention to the more refined, often luxurious, and certainly less common tastes of medieval cuisine, sweetness and exotic spices. For most, these were rare treats, whispers of distant lands, and immense wealth. As we discussed, honey was the primary sweetener. Sugar, if available, came in the form of cane sugar, imported from distant lands via Venice or Genoa. It was incredibly expensive, considered a spice or a medicine rather than a common foodstuff. Imagine a small lump of rock-hard, unrefined sugar, perhaps crushed and sprinkled sparingly on a special dish. Its taste would be intensely sweet, but also perhaps a little earthy or coarse, lacking the refined purity of modern white sugar. Honey, in contrast, offered a more complex, floral, and natural sweetness. Imagine the rich, viscous sweetness of pure honey, perhaps with notes of clover or heather. Dried fruits were also vital sources of sweetness and texture. Dates, figs, prunes, and raisins provided concentrated bursts of sugar and flavor. Imagine the chewy sweetness of a dried fig, its subtle notes of caramel and earth, a truly delightful and rare treat. Fresh fruits were seasonal, of course, and typically consumed raw or stewed with honey. Apples, pears, cherries, and plums would offer a range of sweet and tart flavors when in season. Now for spices. These were the true arbiters of wealth and status. Black pepper, ginger, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, mace, cardamom, and saffron were brought from Asia, their journey long and perilous. This made them astronomically expensive, far more valuable than gold by weight. When used, they were used boldly, often in combinations that might surprise a modern palate. Imagine the sharp, pungent bite of black pepper, fresh ground, its warmth spreading across the tongue. The fiery heat of ginger, both fresh and dried, adding a vibrant zing to savory and sweet dishes. The intense, sweet, spicy aroma and flavor of cinnamon and cloves, often used in combination with meat or in mulled wine. The rich, aromatic depth of nutmeg and mace. These were not used subtly. They were meant to be tasted, to declare the wealth of the host. The flavors of these spices were, for most, a rare and exotic experience. They represented far-off lands, dangerous journeys, and immense riches. To taste pepper was to taste distant India. To taste cinnamon was to taste Ceylon. They were not just flavors. They were narratives, stories of exploration and trade. Sometimes spices were used in dishes called mortrus or white dishes, ground meat or fish, mixed with almonds, rice, and often a lot of saffron and ginger, forming a smooth, pale, delicately flavored paste. These were dishes designed for elegance, for ease of eating, and for displaying the wealth of ingredients. Imagine the soft, almost creamy texture of such a dish, its subtle sweetness from almonds, and the distinct, exotic warmth of saffron and ginger. The sweet flavors, limited as they were, offered moments of pure pleasure. The spices offered exoticism and prestige. Together, They painted a picture of a culinary world where common sustenance met rare indulgence, a world where the ordinary and the extraordinary were starkly, deliciously divided. Let these exotic aromas and delicate sweetness fill your senses, a final calming note in our journey through medieval tastes. Our quiet journey through the tastes of medieval food now gently comes to a close. We've explored the foundational earthiness of grains, the seasonal honesty of vegetables, the robust flavors of meats shaped by preservation, the ever-present hydration of ale, and the rare, exotic whispers of spices and sweetness. What was the true taste of medieval food? It was, above all, the taste of honesty. It was the taste of the earth itself, unmasked by complex processing. It was the taste of the seasons, of fresh bounty followed by the concentrated flavors of preservation. It was the taste of labor, the grinding of grain, the tending of livestock, the long hours of cooking over an open fire. It was a taste that, for most, was overwhelmingly functional. Food was fuel, a means to survive, to work, to endure. It was often bland, sometimes repetitive, yet deeply nourishing. For the wealthy, it was a taste of status and display, a canvas for rare spices and elaborate presentation, often more about the spectacle than the subtle culinary art. It was a taste of scarcity and abundance, the stark contrast between a meager, hunger-tinged meal during famine and the overwhelming, exotic excess of a grand feast. It was a taste dictated by necessity, by climate, by technology, and by social hierarchy. There was a profound connection to the source, to the very land and labor that produced it. Every bite carried the story of its journey, from field to table, a direct link to the rhythms of life and death, sun and soil. As you now drift into deeper relaxation, let these imagined flavors linger. The dense, honest chew of rye bread, the comforting warmth of pottage, the smoky richness of roasted meat, the subtle sourness of ale, the exotic warmth of imported spices. These are not just flavors. They are echoes of a bygone era, of lives lived differently, of palates attuned to a world far removed from our own. May the quiet, grounding tastes of the medieval world guide you now into a peaceful, restorative sleep. All is quiet. The fire crackles softly. The castle sleeps. And the flavors of history gently fade into dreams. Good night.